This week on the Writers Detective Bureau, Bio-Terrorism, state-level investigations, and having your back to the door. I'm Adam Richardson, and this is the Writers Detective Bureau. Welcome to episode 48 of the Writers Detective Bureau, the podcast dedicated to helping authors and screenwriters write professional quality, crime-related fiction. I'd like to thank Gold Shield patron Deborah Dunbar from deborah.dunbar.com, Gold Shield patron CC Jameson from ccjameson.com, Gold Shield patron Larry Keaton, Gold Shield patron Vicky Tharp of vickytharp.com, Gold Shield patron Dharma Kelleher of dharmakelleher.com, Gold Shield patron Chrissy-Ann, who is Chrissy-Ann Creates on Twitter, and my latest Gold Shield patron Jimmy Coe of crimybox.com for their support. I'd also like to thank my newest Coffee Club patrons Chris Schuler, Kelly Garrett, and Brandon Jones, as well as all of my longtime Coffee Club patrons for their support month after month. And special thanks to Marco Carocari for upping his monthly pledge. You can find links to all of the writers supporting this episode by going to the show notes at writersdetective.com/48. And to learn about setting up your own Patreon account for your author business, visit writersdetective.com/Patreon, Patreon. We are fast approaching the end of June, which means the June 2019 APB will be hitting your email box in just a few days. And if you would like to join hundreds of your fellow listeners in receiving crime fiction related writing content, like links to articles and videos and white papers that I personally curate for my followers every month, you can join the mailing list too. You can do so at writersdetective.com/mailing list. I'm a big fan of privacy, so I never share your email addresses, and it is 100% spam free. And speaking of privacy, encrypt your internet connection. I know we joke about deleting our internet search history as crime fiction writers, but you can truly keep those searches private by using a virtual private network to encrypt your internet traffic and even choose which country you want your internet connection to appear from. So you can get the VPN that I trust and I use for less than $4 a month by going to writersdetectivebureau.com/VPN. Elizabeth Clark writes, "Hi, I love your podcast. I discovered you through your interview with Joanna Penn. My question is, what agencies would investigate an attempted bioterrorism attack? I feel like the FBI and the CDC are given, but would the FAA or TSA be involved if the bioterrorism attempt involved distribution by a plane, like a modified Cessna? What about Homeland Security? Would any local agencies be involved if the attempt occurred near a major metro area? Thanks for all the excellent help and advice you give the writing community." Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I really appreciate that. Yes, they would all be involved at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. I'm sure every alphabet soup agency we have in the United States would be involved one way or the other. FBI, DHS, which is Department of Homeland Security, you name it. In the example, you mentioned TSA and FAA. I should mention real quick that the TSA is one of many agencies under the umbrella of the Department of Homeland Security. So technically, by having TSA involved, you have DHS involved. But I'm sure many agencies within DHS would get involved. Terrorism in any form is one of the big, huge things would pretty much activate anyone. The FAA certainly would, just like we saw in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, grounding all aircraft. But as the author of your story, you can pretty much include any agency, federal, state, or local, that you want in this. Everybody's going to want to have a hand in it. The FBI would ultimately have the overarching lead on the investigation, as any kind of domestic terror attack is their formal jurisdiction. So you can create or craft how other agencies get involved pretty much however you like. I think it would be pretty realistic. And then whether all the kids in the sandbox play nicely or not is really up to you. Off the top of my head, you would have the FBI and all of the IC, the intelligence community agencies. They would all be like in all hands mode. Or an all-hands role. You'd have the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, would certainly be involved and kind of overseeing how all of those intelligence community partners, agencies would work with one another. But the important thing to really understand with your story, if you do this, is that you're now dealing with a three-headed monster. The first head is identifying who is responsible, piecing together evidence of what happened and bringing them to justice. So that is the investigation. The second head, similar to the first, is again identifying who is responsible, but with the forward-looking goal of figuring out what else is going to happen. Who else is a threat? What other attacks are in their final stages of preparation? How and where is this group going to attack next? How do we stop them before it happens? Unlike the first one, that is intelligence. And then the third head is dealing with the aftermath of the attack itself. So this involves bringing in the bio experts. And again, the alphabet soup is thick with this. The CDC, Center for Disease Control, the NIH, National Institute of Health, and a whole host of others would certainly be involved in determining the magnitude of the bio attack and how to move forward with regards to dealing with the aftermath. Health and Human Services and a few NGOs, non-governmental organizations that I can think of would definitely get involved on the treatment of victims and distribution of any kind of vaccine stockpile to those that are healthy. So from a storytelling standpoint, you can pretty much include anyone and everyone your storytelling heart desires. You can create conflict over corners of the sandbox, if you like, or you can make it all work like a well-oiled machine and then leave the conflict to the white hat versus black hat story arc. So that's totally up to you. The best resource I can point you toward is Dr. Natasha Bajema. She is a national security expert, and I mean that in a literal senior special advisor to the highest levels of government kind of expert way. She's also a professor, a fiction author. Check out her book, Bionic Bug. And most helpfully for us, she is the host of the Authors of Mass Destruction podcast. And I will include a link to her show in the show notes at writersdetective.com/48. So if you're doing any kind of bioterrorism or WMD kind of story, definitely check out the Authors of Mass Destruction podcast. Brandon Jones writes, I know you've mentioned in a previous podcast about jurisdiction and sharing a workspace. When a state detective is called in for a case, are they partnered with a local detective to get familiar with the area? And what would be a good resource to learn more? And do you have any novel recommendations? Well, Brandon, generally speaking, state investigations are run separately from a local investigation. And the state investigative agency will likely have a local office and, by extension, a state investigator that is located nearby working out of that local state office handling the case. I know that kind of sounds a little confusing, but just think that there are multiple state offices throughout the state. This is one of those things where the setting of your story will really make a difference when it comes to the specifics. But generally speaking, state-level investigative agencies won't just have one singular office. There may be a headquarters in the state capital, but there will be satellite offices throughout the state. This is the same for the feds as well. But it also depends on what kind of state investigative unit we're talking about. As an example, here in California, we have the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement within the California Department of Justice. The DOJ is the state investigative body as well as the state prosecutor's office, and it's headed by the California Attorney General. But they have state special agents that work narcotics investigations all over the state. Now, there may be only one office listed in the yellow pages for the BNE, the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement, but they have agents running undercover operations out of hidden offices or offsite offices, as we call them, all over the state. These agents live in these local communities, so there really isn't the fish out of water problem of needing a local tour guide normally. Now, there are, of course, task forces made up of state agents and local detectives, and I think that might be what you're referring to from a previous episode. But as it relates to your story, the task force likely exists before your case comes about. Now, there are certainly situations where a working group is formed in response to a specific series of crimes, but this is, as I just called it, a working group, an ad hoc group that's pulled together for the short term to work a specific case or series of cases. Whereas a task force is a long-term formal entity, one where the agents and the detectives may rotate through every few years, but the task force itself continues to exist. And that's in a more logistical sense, where that task force is continually funded and, they're just vacancies that are continually filled with state and local detectives and agents. So I hope that makes sense. But even in that temporary ad hoc working group scenario, the state agent that's been assigned to the working group is still likely from the local office of that state agency. You can certainly create a story where the state agent is new to the area, and as a result, we, as the reader or the viewer, learn the lay of the land through the eyes of this outsider character, the state investigator. But it's important for you to understand that this is not usually the way that these cases are normally worked. So if you choose this route, you might consider making the state agent new to the local office. And one more thing I should mention, at least where I am in California, it's not uncommon for the state level investigators to have been a local cop earlier in their career. Using the narc example, I know a guy that was a narcotics detective for a local police department where the police department itself had a rotation policy for their detectives, meaning that after a 2 or 3 year stint in the narcotics unit, he had to go back to patrol as a uniformed officer. And he was actually assigned to one of the state narcotic task forces as a local narcotics detective. When it was time for this friend of mine, this local narc, to go back to patrol at his home agency, he decided to leave the employment of the police department and take a job as a special agent with the state's Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. So, have all state investigators been local cops first? No. Not necessarily. Is it common in the location of where you've set your story? Well, honestly, I have no idea because I don't know where you're telling your story. But the reason I shared this story is I hope that it helps give you some backstory ideas or at least a jumping off point for more research. As far as a good resource to learn more, I would pick a specific real-life agency to base your character off of, and then research the specifics of the job within that agency. So start with the agency's website. Now, if it's a state investigative agency that doesn't have like a ride-along program or doesn't do coffee with a cop or doesn't have a citizens academy, now those are my top 3 researching suggestions, by the way, or at least ways to network with cops within those departments. And it's less likely when we're talking about an investigative agency at the state level where they don't have a uniform presence, so they probably don't have much of a public outreach. Then my suggestion would be to see if they are going to be at any upcoming job fairs or career days at a local college or university. And you can find this out certainly by going to their website and then looking to see if they have any kind of social media presence, getting the word out about the cases that they're working and where they might be in the near future. So I hope that helps. Oh, I forgot. You can't sit with your back to the door. I get it. To most everyone else, it seems paranoid, or at the very least a weird quirk, or annoying if it means that they don't get the chair that they want. But it goes way beyond the teasing or the passive-aggressive snide comments of my friends and loved ones. It has to do with your antenna for knowing what's going on around you, for anticipating threats, for survival. And it's been beaten into us because as cops, we get killed when our backs are to the door. Seriously, like right now, I can cite a few very specific examples of when that happened. You'll see it when you see cops out in public. When cops are at lunch, especially in uniform, one of them will be facing the door. And undoubtedly, the one that is stuck not facing the door will utter the words, "You got the door?" And they're going to say it to the one that has the proper vantage point. Now, does it really need to be said? No. Is it a reminder to your partner that your personal safety now rests with them and that you want confirmation that they know it? You bet it is. No one takes offense because we've all said it. It's every single time I've gone to lunch, we've had that little snippet of a conversation. It's like asking if the intersection is clear on your partner's side of the car when you're running code 3. And it's because we, and I'm not just talking about cops here, I mean all of us, you, me, the guy across from you that's manspreading right now, we are all at varying levels of situational awareness throughout our day. The late Jeff Cooper broke down these varying levels of situational awareness into a color code. And that color code has been taught to police officers around the world, especially as it relates to officer survival and use of force. The color code is actually a spectrum ranging from white to yellow, orange, and red. And it has to do with how situationally aware you are at that moment and recognizing when you need to be in a different color category for survival's sake. So let's talk about it real quick. Condition white. It's entirely likely you are in condition white right now as you're listening to this. You may be safe in your home, behind a locked front door, happily listening to this episode on a smart home device. Don't worry, I'm not going to say A-word's name. Or you might have your earbuds in and listening to this on the train as you commute to work and stare out the window thinking about what I'm saying, completely unaware of who is seated directly behind you, unaware that someone is about to walk through the door from the next train car, not paying attention to how many seats you'll need to climb over to reach the exit if the unthinkable happens and all of a sudden it goes dark and you can't see. When we're asleep, we're in condition white. When we are head down in a book, we are in condition white. When we are utterly relaxed, we are in condition white. We all need our condition white time, and lots of it. But to increase our chances of survival, you can't be in condition white when you're out in public. At least that's what cops think. When date night rolls around and the maitre d' seats us facing the wall, we, the cops who need to face the door, get really uncomfortable because our placement in the environment, our placement in public, has put us in condition white. See, we need to be in condition yellow. So we will either try to switch our seating arrangement, which may seem really rude, especially on date night, or we will seem to be on edge, constantly twisting and fidgeting in our chair to check behind us every half a minute or so. I know it's annoying, but it's the truth. So condition yellow. This is a cop's happy place, and it should be yours too. We're relaxed and aware of what's going on around us. We know where the exits are. We can see ahead of time if trouble is coming. And other than facing the door, you wouldn't have any idea that we were in any kind of heightened awareness condition. We may steal a glance at the door every time someone walks in, but a quarter-second threat or not assessment happens almost unconsciously. If we're seated at a bar, we're using that mirror behind the liquor to survey the room, or we've swiveled the bar stool perpendicular to the bar. Whatever room we're in, we've already run through the what-if scenarios, and we know what we'll do, where we'll move to if the shit hits the fan. Walking out on the street, we're aware if someone's keeping pace behind us, and we do not have earbuds in with volume too loud to hear what's going on around us. No one will be within our personal space without us being aware beforehand. Condition yellow means no surprises. We're aware, and we have a plan. Condition orange. Something's popped up on our condition yellow radar. Is it a threat? We don't know yet, but you have my attention. In the date night scenario, something didn't pass that quarter-second you're not a threat assessment. Do I recognize this guy from a wanted poster? Or does he look like a gang member? Did I see something that made me think he's armed? Funny side note, I was getting onto a plane one time, and as I'm walking through first class, I'm doing my quarter-second assessment, threat, not threat, and I see a guy who makes eye contact with me, and I immediately go into a condition orange because something registered. And he saw me make that registration, and then he smiled and nodded just as I realized he's the actor that always plays the bad guy. So I kind of chuckled to myself, gave him a head nod back. But that condition orange threat, no threat is absolutely real, and it's actually noticeable. So while we're at work, we should go into condition orange every time we pull a car over, every time we contact somebody that might be a suspect. Our body language changes and our attention changes. We're watching signs for an impending attack. Do we think it's immediately imminent? No, but we are ready for it. Our gun hand is definitely free. We're not carrying keys or a flashlight. There's nothing in it. Now, we might subtly move between our loved ones and the threat if we're off duty, moving to a position of advantage. If we've pulled over a car while we're on duty, we're watching signs for an attack. We're watching for furtive movements. We're watching to see where he's looking and how in tune, what condition that guy is in. Our gun hand might be casually resting on our holstered handgun. Not exactly expecting to draw it, but we're ready if we have to, having already conserved that fraction of a second that it would take to move our hand to our weapon if things go bad. The problem with being in condition orange is that this heightened level of awareness is now focused, that the awareness radar is now narrowed to the thing we're focused on and not on the rest of what's around us. Not quite tunnel vision yet, but we're no longer at that 360-degree awareness that we had with condition yellow. Condition red. Something has made this potential threat become an immediate threat. Going to condition red does not mean we start shooting, but our weapon is out and ready. We are immune to surprise from the threat we've identified, but we are no longer fully situationally aware of other potential threats because this has our full attention. We are focused on the threat and moving to the most tactically advantageous position. Now, this is where training and experience comes in. The high level of stress in this condition red situation may lead to tunnel vision, which is an involuntary response where we become blind and even deaf to everything outside of what we're focused on, which in this instance is the threat. And the more we train, the more we are inoculated to this kind of stress, the more adept we are at functioning in condition red, and the less likely we will encounter full-on tunnel vision. Now, condition black wasn't in Cooper's original color code, but some trainers describe condition black as when panic, fear, shock, or severe tunnel vision render us useless. And I mention it here because the entire goal of understanding and using the situational awareness color code is to avoid ever being in condition black. Now, I mentioned that the color code could be used to identify when we should change our awareness state. An example of this is using self-awareness to overcome complacency. Now that you understand the color code spectrum, what could happen if a uniformed officer pulls over a car while they're in condition yellow, or worse, condition white? He's still thinking about the argument he had with his teenager via text message as he's walking up to the car he just lit up with his light bar. Or he's already thinking, I'm just going to give him a fix-it ticket and send him on his way, assuming this stop is going to be just like the uneventful 300 or so traffic stops he's done before this one. This is when the bad guy has the element of surprise at full effect. We want to surprise, not be surprised. Recognizing when the situation we're in is not in alignment with our situational awareness may be the one thing that keeps us alive if we can realign it quick enough. When your protagonist is closing in on the murder suspect, which is likely the climax of your story, What situational awareness color code will she be in? I hear blood orange is ripe this time of year. Thank you so much for listening this week. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get every episode of the Writers Detective Bureau podcast automatically. And if you enjoyed this episode, would you do me the huge honor of leaving me a review? And if you didn't, well, will you share this podcast with someone you think might like it? This podcast is created for you, so don't be shy and send me your crime fiction questions by going to writersdetective.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week and write well.